wonderful, wonderful hero of the age, Miss Alice Coltrane. And speaking of which, I did want to mention to y'all that today is Federico Garcia Lorca's birthday. He's a great Spanish poet. Spoke truth to power, and I would like to honor his memory today during Pride Month, and to remind everybody to speak truth to power, hopefully in the most beautiful words you can find. All right, we are very glad that everybody's here today. We appreciate you all so much supporting our bookstore, especially over the past 2.5 years. Without flesh and blood human beings supporting a brick and mortar bookstore, we cannot have flesh and blood authors come and visit us. So thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to bring everybody together and to be visited by terrific talents as we have here today. You may have come in contact with Farrah's work prior. She wrote Raising the Resistance, A Mother's Guide to Practical Activism, and this new book, Resistance in the Bluegrass, is the one that we're celebrating now. So we really hope that everybody can get a hold of that and take those words to heart. The foreword of this book was written by Miss Attica Scott. She's a mother and an activist, and in 2016 defeated a 34-year incumbent to become the first Black woman elected to the Kentucky General Assembly this century. She currently serves as a member of the Kentucky House of Representatives from the 41st District. And folks, you're going to hear a lot of really conducive in-concert material in this book here. Farrah Alexander is a writer whose work focuses on feminism, parenting, social justice, politics, and current events. Her work has been featured in HuffPost, Bust, and Scary Mommy. Today we're going to have a tremendous discussion between these two very powerful women about this wonderful new book. Thank you, Farrah. Thank you, Attica, for being here. Everyone.
Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you, Susan and Carmichaels, for hosting us. My first book was actually published in August of 2020, and so I did not have the opportunity to do live book events, and this is completely new for me. And so to have the honor of sitting beside Representative Attica Scott is just really wonderful. And so thank you, Attica Scott, for being here and writing the foreword and just being incredible. Such an inspiration to
And
us all.
please call me Attica.
Okay, Attica.
Stay represented.
Yeah, my kids are laughing because they mentioned Attica. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much, and happy Pride Month. So I thought today I would just read a little bit, and Attica will read a little bit as well of the wonderful foreword that she wrote. And the section that I chose to read is about a lot of things, but one thing is the protest demanding justice for Breonna Taylor. That's something that I have talked about a lot in the past couple of years, and one reason I talk about that is because it was a huge disparity in the way protesters were treated. That was not my first protest, but it was the first protest that I attended where I feared for my safety, where I saw police in riot gear when there was no riot gear. And I think it's important to speak about. And so I'll read a little bit about that now. The largest protest I had attended was the first Women's March of 2017 in Washington, D.C. It was also the largest single-day protest in American history, with more than 200,000 people in D.C. alone. We marched through the streets, chanted, held signs, all the standard protest stuff. I vividly remember police officers directing traffic and even high-fiving protesters as they passed. Naively, I first celebrated the warm welcome by the police and the fact that not a single arrest was made. I didn't immediately think that maybe That was because most of the marchers looked like me. And no matter how many white women in pink knitted hats gather, they're unlikely to be met with tear gas and riot gear. When I marched in the streets of my community, it was not unlike that first women's march. We held signs and chanted. At its height, there were hundreds of protesters, but this time, black voices were leading the chants, and most of the crowd was black. There were no high fives from the police. I never thought to Google whether it's water or milk that neutralizes tear gas until I protested with a majority black crowd. It's water. Milk helps with the pepper pulse. When police approached the crowd in line formation, holding shields and riot gear covering their faces, the crowd would anxiously await what was to come. Tear gas, rubber bullets, pepper balls, mass arrest. It was chilling. Attica Scott knows her district, the 41st, which encompasses much of the Louisville area and its demographics. While she's finally representing issues Black, Indigenous, and people of color face, and especially Black women, she's also mindfully fighting for issues facing all people in her district. There are so many people across Kentucky, not only in the district that I represent, not only in Louisville, but across Kentucky, who deserve to have people who are using their voice and their position to speak up on human rights and social justice, said Representative Scott. To really advocate for fairness and equity and freedom, all of Kentucky deserves that. I remember my first session here in 2017. Young white women were here doing their grassroots lobbying from Eastern Kentucky. They stopped by my office to say, "Thank you for being the representative we wished we had." At that moment, I was reminded of why I needed to be here. It wasn't only for the Black babies in the West End of Louisville where I live. It's important for everyone to see a Black woman advocating for us all. Currently, the Kentucky General Assembly is extremely white, extremely male, and does not accurately represent the people of Kentucky. So when I asked Representative Scott what someone could do to become politically engaged and increase representation, she was clear. Run, she said. I tell folks who've been on the front lines for justice for Breonna Taylor, run. Run for local office, run for state office. You deserve to be in DC. You deserve to run, you deserve to join a lot of us. You know what you want to do. You deserve to be a state representative. I'm just keeping the seat warm for you.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to read a little bit from the foreword, and then we're taking questions afterwards? Okay, all right. Resistance in the Bluegrass is a complimentary book to author Farrah Alexander's Raising the Resistance, A Mother's Guide to Practical Activism. In Resistance in the Bluegrass, readers are taken on a journey through what has always been a part of what makes Kentucky home for many of us, resistance. Whether occupying the railroad tracks in Harlan, Kentucky and chanting "No pay, we stay," or occupying Injustice Square Park in downtown Louisville and chanting "No justice, no peace." We are Kentucky, the ones who marched in Appalachia for Black lives and the ones who showed up in Western Kentucky to end poverty. We are Kentucky, the ones who resist corporate control over our lives and the ones who are creating the care communities across the Commonwealth. We are Kentucky, the ones who are protecting our environment and the ones who know that healthcare is a human right. Our own bell hooks reminds us, true resistance begins with people confronting pain and wanting to do something to change it. That is our story. It is who we are at our core. Rather than linger in our pain, we resist any notions of giving up, of throwing in the towel, of walking away from a challenge. We certainly know about challenges in Kentucky. We know what it means to be displaced from our mobile home communities. We know what it means not to have clean bathing and drinking water. We know the sting of discrimination based on who we love. We also know what community, love, and solidarity look like in action. Reading was and continues to be an act of resistance. My ancestors were beaten and mutilated for learning how to read. Reading remains fundamental to our collective liberation. It is how we rise. It is how we create transformational change. It is how we build the beloved community. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Now, we really just love to have a conversation. If anyone has any questions you'd like to ask either one of us.
Farrah, now that you happen to choose the different, or how you choose the different people that you interviewed and focused on in the book?
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. It was a really organic process. I was pretty familiar with some of the big change makers who were making progress right now, like of course Attica, and some I just discovered through some of my research when I was looking at a certain issue. So some people popped up throughout the news stories I remembered, or I had actually seen them make change, and then some things were pretty new to me. So I was familiar with Alberta Jones, but I wasn't that familiar. And so I did a little bit more research about her. And so some of these names just kind of popped up, but most, I think a lot of people who are making change in Kentucky right now will be surprised to see they pop up in this book. Daniel, do you have a question?
Do you think you're gonna make a third one?
Make a third book? I think I probably will.
Okay.
I think I probably will.
I'd like to read it.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I have a question. It's for Attica. You've stood up for some amazing things in your work in the legislature, specifically around state taxes on certain products. And you're facing an audience of old white men. How do you find the courage to do that?
Thank you so much. I mean, I find that courage in rooms like this because I know I have the opportunity to serve in places and spaces where either folks don't want to go because they know what it's like or aren't able to go for whatever reasons, but I am. And so I went, and when I'm serving in Frankfurt and I'm fighting on issues related to things like anti-critical race theory or abortion access or whatever the case may be, is because I know there are people back home who are expecting and depending on me to use my power and my voice to speak up. So that's how I find the strength. I realize that those folks are going to go home just like I have to go home and face the people that I live with, my neighbors, family members, friends. And you all are much more important to me than mostly white men in Frankfurt who don't care anything about us. And so I can't prioritize them, I have to prioritize the people. Thanks for the question.
One thing that I would love to add, when I was interviewing people for this book, a lot of people were very dejected because of the General Assembly. When you try to lobby for a progressive cause in the General Assembly, it feels like a losing battle. And when there are even more representatives that are not down for your cause, it can be really disheartening. And so I spoke to a lot of people who had a pretty negative attitude about the future. And that was one question that I asked Attica, and she was perhaps the only person who was like, oh, no, like, I don't have time for that. I don't have time for these negative feelings. Like, I have work to do, and we have progress to be made.
Well, I mean, that's exactly right, because I can't possibly think about not only my ancestors, but your ancestors who were part of the abolitionist movement or who were liberators. I can't think about them and say, well, I'm just going to give up. Like, what I'm going through is nothing compared to what people were going through who were trying to abolish slavery or trying to get indigenous people back the land that was stolen from them. Like, come on, I lost an election, boo-hoo, right? I still am here to keep fighting. And so that's why I remain hopeful, because I say to people all the time, we live to fight another day. We're here. So let's use this moment, this time, our energy to try to make a difference in people's lives in whatever way that we can. For me, giving up isn't an option. For me, losing hope is not an option. Of course, I'll be disappointed. And, I'm thinking about Frankfurt and I'm like, oh my gosh, we've got 25 people who are part of our political party. That number's probably going to drop. And in January, it's going to be 15. And it is depressing, but it isn't a reason to give up. We can't just say our lives don't matter, that we're not going to fight for equity and fairness and justice because it's hard. Of course it's hard, and that's why we have to fight even harder and smarter.
What are the encouraging signs that you see? What little tidbits of light?
Well, I see a lot of encouragement to Farrah's point about the young white women from Eastern Kentucky who were lobbying in Frankfurt in 2017, my first session, and they came to my office and said, we just wanted to stop by and say thank you for being the representative we wish we had. I mean, I'm hopeful because here were young women who said, despite everything that we know we're going to face when we go to Frankfurt, we're going anyway, right? We're going to go anyway and use our voices and bring our Eastern Kentucky stories and messages to the state capitol. That gives me hope. That's the kind of message I want to bring back home to people, to say, keep going. I think about one of our young people who was out on the square and who was killed during the protest, Travis Nagy, and that's something he said all the time, keep going. That's it, y'all, just keep going. When it gets hard, when it's depressing, when it seems impossible, keep going, because there is something else that's bigger and better for us. It might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but your kids deserve for us to keep going because it's going to be for them, right? I believe that what we're doing right now isn't for us anyway. Like, most of us who are adults aren't going to see half the changes that we're trying to fight for. We're doing it for the kids. And so, that gives me hope as well. And whenever kids come to the Capitol, or I get to go speak at a school, like I spoke at a 5th grade promotion last week at Rangeland Elementary, I was like, man, the energy here, these kids are ready. They don't know what's going on in Frankfurt. They kind of hear what's going on in DC. That doesn't matter to them. What matters in this moment is knowing that they are loved and that someone is showing up for them and telling them you are important. And I'm here because I want you to know that you are important. I'm doing everything that I can for you. That's the kind of message that I have to bring.
Hey, this is for either of you. I love your combined thoughts. So if someone were to say this is Kentucky and issues like social justice or a history of it are meant for big cities or blue states, that's not us. We haven't had to worry about that in the 20th century. What are the surprises that you could say to someone about our own Commonwealth history that says we've been looking at this for a long time and there's been these pockets of resistance? Blow our mind or blow their mind with realizing that there's always been these voices and places here in Commonwealth history. You don't have to blow their mind, but
Well, I think a lot of people, after writing this book and talking to so many Kentuckians, I have a newfound respect for Kentuckians and those who make change. And I'm a little defensive of them because I think too many times people dismiss Kentuckians, and it's incredibly unfair and unwarranted, because no matter how you look at it, Kentucky does have a lot of power. Like, he may not be a friend of mine, but Mitch McConnell has been a very powerful person right here from Kentucky. And there's so many progressive groups throughout Kentucky, outside of Louisville, outside of Lexington, in some of these rural areas, who are fighting for amazing causes. Like, I wrote a little bit about, this is Pride Month adjacent, the Derby City Sisters. I'm not sure, are you all familiar? Okay. So the Derby City Sisters are an incredible group. They're a charity that does incredible charitable work in the community, and they have been popping up in rural Kentucky. And so now we don't have pride parades just in Louisville and Lexington, they're in Pikeville, they're in other areas, and I find that really inspiring. Because also I think the people who stand up in those communities, I'm just in awe of their bravery and their grit to stand up and proudly be themselves and make progress. I just think it's incredible. How about you?
Oh, I mean, we have a history of resistance in Kentucky. Louisville used to be known as Strike City because labor unions were out on strike all the time in Louisville. So we have that history. We also have the history of coal miners who would fight back and resist corporations who were treating them with disrespect and not valuing their workers and their communities. So we have that history of the fight back from coal miners in Eastern Kentucky. And my goodness, the Fairness Campaign, the premier LGBTQ organization in our Commonwealth, and quite honestly across this country, that has as its core dismantling racism. That's right here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, the Bluegrass state. I'm talking about that wherever I go, and I travel a lot, and I'm like you, Farrah, I am very defensive about Kentucky. When folks start going down that negative road about Kentucky, there's no hope, nothing's ever gonna change there, I'm right back with, challenging them with, this is all that we've done in Kentucky, right? And with your help rather than your criticism and your condescension, we can do even more, right? We can do even more if we pull together and say Kentucky is worth fighting for. The people of Kentucky matter, and together we can actually make Kentucky better for our entire country, because I still believe the way that the South goes is the way that this country goes. And if we ignore Kentucky, if we write off Kentucky, then we're doomed. We're gonna doom our country. So I'm not gonna be one of those people. I'm gonna talk about the amazingness of Kentucky all the time.
Thank you for that.
This one's for you.
Oh, okay.
How does your Judaism inform your approach to resistance and social justice?
What a great question. So,
This could be your first one.
yeah, I haven't thought about that actually. That is one thing that I'm sorry. She asked how my Judaism affects my passion for social justice, and as some of you may know, it affects my passion for social justice a lot. I think so many of these social justice issues aren't necessarily political as they are moral for many of us. And so that is how I personally feel in a lot of issues. And so that is a driving force for me. But I also noticed as I talked to other people, they were motivated by their own religions. And I was even a little bit surprised by that, because I had a chapter in the book about religious activism where I spoke to Ira Grupper, who is, you're familiar with her? He's a character. So Ira Grupper, now he's probably, I'm not sure how old he is, he's probably in his late 70s, early 80s maybe, and he wears overalls and like big glasses, and he is a badass. Like he was very active in the civil rights movement and talked about being arrested in Mississippi, and he, like me, has been motivated by his Jewish faith. And when I talk to other people, not about religion, but about, for example, poverty and housing justice, they slowly started talking about their own faith. Ben Carter, I talked to from the Kentucky Equal Justice Center, suddenly started talking about how, as a Christian, he feels that he is called to social justice. And so I found that very interesting and sort of inspiring, because I think too often when people think of religious activism, they think of like Christian nationalism right now. You know, we have a far-right movement that has been used to hurt people and promote bigotry and deny people their rights. and they shouldn't control the conversation, in my opinion. And so, yes, that's very important to me.
I love the question because I feel like, at least for me in my activism work, sometimes those of us who are religious, who are people of faith, will sometimes get pushbacks from folks who are like, it's religion is why we're in the mess we're in now. Yes, I'm not arguing that at all. What I'm saying is I am a woman of faith, and my faith is what helps me to keep going. My best conversations are with my pastor, and I'm like, so I'm against these anti-abortion measures. I'm for fairness, X, Y, Z. He's like, yes, I know. He's like, it's not news, right? We know these things. And then I get him involved. So when I served on Metro Council, he spoke in support of raising the minimum wage. He talked about it as a moral issue, right? He talked about it as an issue that people of faith should stand for. Why would we as people of faith want anyone to live in poverty? That is not what Jesus would do, right? And so, but I've also been able to help educate the congregation. So I remember writing a letter to the editor a few years ago about, I'm not sure why I was writing about people who were transgender, but anyway, one of the deacons at the church came up to me after church and said, so I read your letter to the editor, can you explain to me what it means to be transgender? And I was like, first of all, no, not really, because that's not who I am, so I don't want to make a mistake and explain the wrong thing, but I explained what I knew and understood. He was like, thank you for the education, I didn't have any idea. So if he didn't have me in church as someone he could talk to, he may have never had that conversation, but with my limited knowledge, I was able to give him a little bit of knowledge to help open up his mind. So I feel like as a person of faith, it's important for me to do that external work, but also bring it back home to my own church to say, we have work to do, we can be better. I want to help educate, and I also want to see y'all out on the front lines as well. So, I think it's what we're able to do when we go back and say, what are we called to do? And for me, this is a calling to be someone who stands up and fights for human rights and social justice. It's not just a thing to do. It is, I can't imagine doing anything else because it's what my spirit and my soul guides me to do.
I love that. And it also reminds me of a story that's in the book with the first Unitarian church in Louisville, Kentucky. And I think, sometimes churches, synagogues, places of worship, they make mistakes. And there's time to correct that. And you can chart a new course. And that is what that church did. They recognized that in the past they didn't do enough for racial justice. And they were ready to correct that. And so they put a Black Lives Matter banner on their church, but that wasn't the last that they did. After that, protesters had to flee an area, and at the time there was a curfew in effect, but houses of worship were exempt. And so they said, come here. We're a house of worship. We're exempt. We're a safe place. We're a sanctuary. And that's what we're here to do. And I thought that was incredibly powerful. That, it's okay to make mistakes in the past, acknowledge that, learn from that, and then do better.
I mean, I can't be a woman of faith and not believe in divinity. And for me, that was divine for churches to be exempt. I was like, oh, God is good. We didn't even know we need that until it was time. And we were like, oh, so that church that's exempt, we need that church right now. Right? And so, it's beautiful to work with Representative Lisa Wilner, who's a member of the Unitarian Church that we went to during the protest, and for her to be able to call her pastor and say, so, we have folks who literally need sanctuary. Will we open up our church to them? And to have the church open up meant the world to us. I've come a long way. It's been 2 years, so I think this is probably one of the first times I've been able to talk about it without tearing up. But that was powerful. It's a predominantly white church. Most of us who were out protesting were Black. Not everybody would know it, but most of us were Black. And to have this white church say, we're going to open up to you, and we know this is going to put us in a difficult position, because it did. It made them a target. But the fact that they were willing to do that said a lot, and it put a lot of people's minds at ease, made people feel safer, and made us feel a different sense of community that I think may have been missing in that moment, but we found it again in that church opened its doors for us.
Yeah.
Your book has opened up so many different categories that you can be focused on. Can any of these be focused on teaching in schools? Or are we gonna be not able to talk about some of them?
Okay. Well, I certainly hope so. I know there is a class at the University of Kentucky that is actually called Activism in Kentucky, which sounds like just about the coolest class I've ever heard of. And I was able to speak to that class. And I find that really encouraging too. Just like Attica said, you know, we're really doing this for the next generation, for our children. Like, I'm so inspired by Attica, but I'm also really inspired by her daughter Ashanti and seeing all the amazing things that she's doing. And there's something about Gen Z that is like even more unapologetic. They know who they are, they know what they want, they know what's right, and they're ready to get it. And so I'm incredibly inspired by that. And so just speaking to that college course was really exciting because these are just really passionate kids, they're not like kids, they're young adults, but who see a brighter Kentucky and they're gonna do what they can to make it happen, and I think they will.
It's a generation. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just really inspired by the next generation. I think they're incredible.
Yeah, watch out for them because
Yes.
at least we have a filter. And I'm like, I will go so far, but that one over there, she's like, no filter. I don't owe anybody anything. I'm not running for office. I don't need your vote. I'm just saying whatever. But to your question, though, I do feel like, and I won't be going back to the legislature in January. I'll be a state rep at the end of December. I'm very concerned. One, with this whole, anti-critical race theory, classroom censorship legislation that passed this session and the impact that's going to have when the school year begins for K through 12 in August. But I think we need to be really mindful that come January 2023, that legislature is going to try to push the Don't Say Gay bill. I guarantee you they are. It's coming, and we can't sit on our hands and think, oh, Kentucky's exempt, it didn't happen this session. No time for sitting on hands, y'all. It's time to be vigilant and be ready to be active to push back against that and defeat bills like that because they're just duplicating everything and replicating everything they've seen everywhere else. So if Florida can do it, of course Kentucky can. It's all, ALEC moving its bills across the country. And this year, Kentucky didn't have the stomach for it because they already were being horrible. But next year, they're going to be ready, and we have to be ready as well.
On that note, I'm a teacher at Farrah High School. And my question is, what do we do to get our high school students ready and engaged and active to resist some of these things? Because I see it, like you said all the time, with the next generation, they're not having it, and they have a voice. So how do we get them?
Oh, I
with our students?
So thank you for that question. I love getting young people activated and engaged with local and state government because I feel like that's where they can make the most difference. And with their school boards, of course, being involved in that way. But part of it is education, right? So you're doing what you can in the classroom, but there has to be community education as well for our young people to understand what's happening at the local and state level and how they can get involved. They can write letters to their elected officials. They can call their elected officials. I'm one of those people, for example, if I came to Fairdale to speak in August and when school starts back and said, contact your state rep and your state senator about this issue that's going to come up in January, I'm going to have one of my colleagues email or call me or text me and say, you've been talking to students again, right? Because they want to know what they can do. So they'll call, they'll email, especially when I tell them, when you call, you will never reach your representative, trust me. So shake off the nerves. No, because you're going to call amazing switchboard operators who are going to take your message and get it to the right person. So I don't want young people to be afraid of that. Emailing, phone calling, and then when I tell them, tag them on social media, they're like, I got you. I'm right there with you, I can do that. Because, most elected officials don't want to be tagged, especially if they're being challenged or questioned or criticized. But if we do that on social media, everybody else gets to see it and gets to be part of the conversation as well. But I also think it's important for them to be part of advocacy days, whether it's, young people going to a school board meeting to talk about an issue or going to Metro Council. So for example, a friend of mine, Dick Clark, is trying to get Christopher's Law passed at the local and state level to protect people who are at bars from bouncers who aren't trained to be able to respond to, maybe a health situation, or not respond violently to someone, but to instead focus on a more compassionate response to somebody who they maybe have an issue with. So he hasn't had much luck at the Metro Council level, but imagine if we had a busload of young people who showed up at Metro Council and said, so every single one of you on this council, all 26 of you, represent us as kids, and we want to know that when we get old enough to go out to a bar, that we're going to be safe. So you need to pass Christopher's Law. That would be phenomenal, because I serve on Metro Council, and trust me, they're going to be like, oh, so they're going to be able to vote for us soon. That's all we care about. And so that's going to make them want to act. And so I think if we can get young people activated in that way, we can get more of the kinds of bills we need passed, because they're going to be coming next. They're like, okay, they're going to be like Ashanti. If you're not going to address this issue in 4 years when I'm old enough to run, I'm going to run for your seat, and I'm going to try to address it myself. So I think that's another way to get young people involved, is to make sure they're able to show up at these meetings. Get a busload of young people who go to Frankfurt during the legislative session. Have a whole high school students lobby day. There's a college and university students lobby day. Have a high school students lobby day where high school students are working together to get busloads of students from across Kentucky to go to Frankfurt about issues. Well, and then real quick, I would say, I've always encouraged students to shadow me for a day, spend a day with me, knowing what it's like to serve in office. Encourage your students, any of you who are connected to young people, encourage them to connect with their state rep, their state senator, to spend a day with them, because it helps to demystify this whole thing. I tell people all the time, we pump gas, it's too expensive right now, but we pump gas, we go to the grocery store just like everybody else, right? We're not putting on our pants, jumping in them 2 legs at a time at all. Trust me, I fall over. So I don't want young people to put folks on a pedestal. We're not. Don't put us on a pedestal. You can reach us just like you can reach your teacher.
Yeah, as a society, we tend to get really excited in the presidential elections, but then the midterm comes and there's this apathy. So this question is for both of you. How can we get people excited about the importance of getting out to vote during the midterms?
That's a great question. I think right now people need to see how local politics affect them personally. And there's so many ways that it does affect them. And I think just increasing political, what am I looking for? Participation is really what we need. So when Attica is talking about people coming in and shadowing her and writing their representatives, a lot of adults don't know how to contact their representatives. So if we're starting that early and we're starting that process, you know who your representatives are, you know how to reach them, and you know what they're doing. I think that's really important. So I know me personally, when I follow some of my local representatives, Democrat or Republican, they're doing things that I don't agree with, and doing things that affect me, affect my children, affect my community. And I think that's true for pretty much everyone. So that's what I really think we need. We just need more political participation, people to know what is happening and how it affects them and their community. What do you think, Attica?
I agree, and I will say this election cycle, Secretary of State was expecting about a 14 to 15% turnout. We had a 20% turnout, so I want to, yay to the folks who defied those odds. But it's also because they were exciting people on the ballot. Trust me, I don't expect people to come out and vote if they're like, well, they're just like the other person I could have voted for. So why should I bother? But we've got to make sure that we're putting people on the ballot who are exciting folks, whether we win or lose. Folks were like, oh, I'm going to go out and vote for them. And then they see all the other people that they need to vote for. And then we remind them, turn over that ballot and vote for those judicial candidates who most people don't know. I only know them because Ashanti was the campaign manager for one of the judicial candidates, and every time I was like, which one? The district, circuit, can't remember. It's a lot to remember, but we also have to do that education. So I think that if more and more of our amazing nonprofit community-based groups did education around electoral organizing and education, that would make a difference too. Because what tends to happen is that there might be 1, 2, or 3 people on the ballot that folks are like, yeah, mayor, Congress, US Senate, and then don't know the rest of the folks that they're voting for. So we gotta do a lot more of that education. We also gotta mobilize people more to get to the polls. Access is an issue. So I'd love to see more transportation opportunities for people to get to the polls. That's another reason why there's low turnout. And then we also need to register new voters. I feel like in Kentucky, we kind of dumped voter registration. I didn't feel any energy around voter registration this year or in 2020, and I don't know what's happened. I don't know if folks are like, why bother, forget it, folks aren't gonna come out and vote anyway, or what, but I feel like there's so many new and young voters and people whose names have changed or addresses changed, that we gotta get them registered and get their registration updated. But we can't just give up, we gotta keep doing that work.
I was wondering if, talking about the importance of knowing who's on the ballot and the different races, there was a race on my ballot that I skipped entirely because I couldn't find any information about any of the candidates. And I reached out to people on friends on social media and said, can anyone tell me where I can find positions? I checked Wikipedia and all those places, and I couldn't find any information. And I was sort of at a loss because I was like, I've been digging and I can't find anything. And a lot of those, I don't remember what it was for, like some kind of.
It's probably constable.
Yeah.
Oh. She knew.
Yeah, it was possible. And I mean, that's a big thing with the right-wing Christian nationalists, is they try to get these nonpartisan positions and get in there and then enact whatever they can. I sort of lost my question there, but like, how do I, in that case, what's the best approach to that? I skipped voting because I didn't feel, for that race, I didn't feel like I could make an informed vote.
That's tough. I mean, those particular offices. I know there has been a push this past election, especially with judicial offices. I saw there was a guide from the ACLU of Kentucky on judicial offices specifically, and I thought that was very helpful. And I think we probably need more education like that and expand that education so voters can be more informed about everyone on their ballot. I know that's a big ask, but I think that's what we really need to do, so everyone can be an informed voter.
And you raised a point that I have shared with the Democratic Party, but I think it gets lost, and I'm just talking about Democrats because I choose to be one, is that people will skip. They will vote, but they will skip a particular race because either they don't have any interest in it or they don't know who the people are running. And so people will come out and vote, they just won't vote for that particular area. And it's a nuance that you lifted up that I don't think enough people understand, is that we can't allow any of the ballot offices to go without some kind of public education. So KFTC, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, Fairness Campaign, they do great voter guides. I don't remember whether or not they had
The
constable in
didn't
there.
have anything for constables.
Didn't have anything for,
No.
probably because most of us want to get rid of constables. But, so they were like, I don't know. But I have a friend who wants to run for constable. We don't want her to run. She does not need to be in that position. But a lot of folks in more rural parts of Kentucky do use their constables for a lot of different reasons. So it's been a back and forth conversation in Frankfurt as well. But I think that we also need to think about what happens in California. So my aunt, my dad's baby sister is from Louisville, but lived in Los Angeles for probably 25 years, and they do everything right. So they have like a voter guide of all of the positions, and it gets mailed to your home if you're a registered voter. And so she talks about that all the time. She's like, I got nothing here. She moved back home in 2019. She got nothing in 2020. nothing in 2022. She was just out there on her own, or calling me and asking who she should vote for. So that's something else we could think about, and as constitutional offices are up again, and we have somebody running for Secretary of State, that needs to be a question we ask them. Would you be willing to invest in a voter guide that the Secretary of State's office puts out about candidates on the ballot, or that the county clerks have something to do, right? So that the Secretary of State doesn't have to be responsible for all 120 counties. That's a lot, but the clerk can be empowered to put out a guide like that. So more, it's more generalized. It doesn't have a specific slant to it or lean, but it's just, this is who's running, this is something about them, this is a link to their, social media or websites, whatever they may have, so we can learn more about them. But we don't do anything like that at all in Kentucky yet.
That's a really good idea. Like, we really do need that. Yes, I think we all need to pressure our county clerk.
I really have just a statement more than anything. I think that we're all here because we're just passionate and ready. And for me, it's multiple issues. And I think we're just at a crisis point, a tipping point about some issues that many of us feel very strongly about. I have multiple ones. Being from Texas this week, the shooting was my tipping point. And I just think we're at the point that if we really care and we're really up to here, that we all have to find something and do something. And, to ask and to talk and to I was on a Zoom meeting with the Mothers Demand Action, and I'm going to assume you're wearing orange for that reason, that it's not just your favorite color. But, I think they have things that you can do for 30 minutes a week. There is something, whether it's queer issues or gun violence or social justice or all of the above, we can all do something. Register to be a voter, participant on voting day. I just don't think we're at a point to where those of us who care cannot do nothing. And I guess that's my point. It's great to sit here and talk, but I would just encourage everybody to do something, because I just don't think we can sit on anymore.
Absolutely, I agree. And in my first book, I talked about identifying the issues that you're most passionate about, because one thing that I personally struggle with, and maybe some of you do as well, we are passionate about so many issues, we care about so many issues, but can we effectively advocate for all those issues? I'm not sure. And so I suggest you identify 3 issues that are your issues, that you care the most about, that you know about, and you're going to advocate for all the time, not just in emergency situations. And one of those issues for me is gun violence. And I actually sit on the Everytown Authors Council, and I personally believe that Everytown and Moms Demand Action, they have made tremendous progress. I know it's hard to see sometimes, but they really, really have made tremendous progress. And there are people who have been affected directly by gun violence who are now in the House of Representatives. We have, and so many people who are making a positive change. And I think slowly we are going to see a culture shift where we're going to surpass the NRA. And it's not going to be a badge of honor to have an A from the NRA. And we see what happens, and we're going to fight against that. And so I completely agree with you, and I encourage everyone to advocate for the issues they care about. I think a lot of times, and we have an emergency situation, the Dobbs decision, which is most likely going to ban abortion in the entire United States eventually, and most definitely in Kentucky because we have a trigger law. When that decision came out, a lot of people were like, oh no, I'm so angry and this is an emergency, and they try to reinvent the wheel. And they are like, like we're going to create a network of people who can give women access. Those networks already exist. So if you care about that issue, but you haven't been at the forefront, that hasn't been one of your key issues, then just take a step back and support those groups that already exist. Here in the local area, we have the Kentucky Health Justice Network. They have been preparing for this. So we don't need another group. We don't need, people to create new things. We need to support what exists. And when it comes to gun violence, what I personally think is that we should support groups like Everytown because they have the numbers, they have the resources, they have the evidence-based solutions, and I think that's how we're going to get change.
And to your point about doing something, some action. So yes, we have on our ballot in November an amendment to effectively ban abortion across Kentucky. If that's something that you are concerned about, I encourage you to start having conversations now with your family, friends, coworkers, because you're gonna find there are a lot of people who don't even know that that question is gonna be on the ballot in November. And so if we're not talking to folks now in June to get them ready to vote in November, then we have some responsibility that we have to bear if that amendment ends up passing. Because if we know about it and we're aware, I believe it's our responsibility to tell other people who may not be aware that in November, Kentucky has a ballot amendment to effectively end abortion access in our state.
It's me again. Your conversation about communications and learning about people who are lower down on the ballot. Will be 83 years old. I remember when we used to have local newspapers, and local newspapers interviewed everybody that was running, and you got to find out what people really were thinking because you read it in the paper. Nowadays, you just hear buzzwords, and it seems like there is no core of communication. It's just like you're talking about what Farrah just mentioned. There's a group out there. People are not finding out what we need to know. Even I went to vote in the primaries, and I looked at the list of names and I thought, well, shucks, I know about this person, but I don't have a clue. And so I didn't even vote for that person because I didn't want to just randomly pick somebody. It seems like we're losing a source of communication, even though we're in a world of wide communication. We can't narrow it down.
Yeah, that's true. And one thing that I think would be incredibly helpful is like the voter guides that Attica was talking about, that as wonderful as the voter guides are from the Fairness Campaign and the ACLU of Kentucky, but something that is completely nonpartisan and goes to everyone universally. I think we need more universal communications that people don't dismiss because they think there is a bias. And I think that would be incredibly helpful, and that is something that we don't have enough of right now. We really don't.
That's right. Because if you're not on the mailing list of the Fairness Campaign or KFTC, you're not going to get that voter guide.
I know you've raised, and we've already next.
So I guess I'm looking for a little bit of personal advice related to resistance in the Bluegrass. I spent about almost 10 years in Boston and recently moved back to Kentucky in 2020. And over those 10 years is sort of when I was coming into my understanding of how important politics are and all of that. And the thing that has been the most difficult for me to navigate is living now in a city where I feel like I am in the vast minority of my opinions and feelings and actions, and quite truthfully, it's been difficult because it scares me where I don't feel like I have the backing of the majority, and so for me to be more vocal about issues that get people really angry, I have found myself retreating of sorts and just not feeling, and I know it takes bravery working on it. I aspire to this Gen Z Gen but I found that to be the most difficult. I don't really know how to navigate talking and advocating for these very sensitive issues for as strongly as I can feel, because I am worried, you know, in Boston it comes from worry that my literal next door neighbor, you know, walks out with a gun on his hip, you know, and so it doesn't make me feel any better to want to have that conversation. So I'm just looking for advice maybe in navigating what resistance can look like here, given those circumstances.
Well, it's hard. I don't have an easy answer for you. I think it gets easier over time. I know I have personally grown up as like a pretty passive, like don't rock the boat, don't create waves kind of person. And then I just found my own way and cared about the issues that I care about, and I spoke out about it, and people were mad. And I have a lot of people who blocked me on Facebook, things like that. And I'm not popular in a lot of circles. And at first when that happened, it really hurt my feelings, and it was really overwhelming and made me want to retreat, and it was hard. But then it got easier. The more that you do it, and people are going to be angry, and people are going to disagree with you, and you get more comfortable with it. That's the absolute truth. I know it's difficult. I encourage you to just like rip off the Band-Aid and do it, and also find your people. There's so many amazing groups in Kentucky, and it is so encouraging to join a group that aligns with your values, that they completely understand where you're coming from. I think that is one of the most important things, and you can make change together. They're not going to say, yeah, that's difficult, don't do it. You know, you're gonna encourage each other, and you're gonna find hope in each other, and that's really what I would encourage you to do. What do you think, Attica?
Same here. I was gonna say, get your people, find your people, the folks who are gonna have your back, the folks who, if you post something, you know that when the trolls come, when the negative, you know, folks come, that you have people who are gonna have your back. But also, everywhere in Kentucky, there are groups doing amazing things. Everywhere in Kentucky, it doesn't matter where I go, there are folks doing some good and important work. And there's a group probably for any and everything that you may be interested in. Every single one of the chapters in Resistance in the Bluegrass, there's an organization, groups, entity somewhere in Kentucky working on that issue. So I agree with Farrah, get involved with the groups that may be focusing on your top 3 issues, like you said, and then that's when you'll find your people if you haven't already found them, and you will have that hope, you will have that inspiration, you will have that encouragement.
It's kind of just a theme question for you both. I'm hearing a lot of examples of sort of reactive resistance, and then also examples of proactive resistance, and sort of like, how do you strike that balance in your own lives? Because, for example, you were talking about the education that kind of goes out. And so I sign up for politicians I don't like, their emails, so that I can see what they're talking about. But then at the same time, you have to be careful, because then it's like, oh, we gotta respond to that, gotta go after that, gotta go after that. And of course, that can really deplete your energy. Some people might fire them up, so I was just curious what thoughts you might have along those lines.
It's very difficult. I mean, that's another question that unfortunately I don't have a great, easy answer for. It's something that I do struggle with. In the past week was a really hard week for probably all of us. You know, I feel like we're constantly dealing with collective trauma, and that is really, really hard. And I don't have easy answers for that, but that's something that I personally struggle with. I know I have my friend Kara in the back, and we had a conversation with one of our mom friends. Kara is one of my best friends who also has a small child. And now it's a very scary time to have small children. And so we were talking about our recent events in Texas, and because gun violence is an issue that I personally care about and know a fair amount about, you know, I was just kind of like firing off our formation of like, this is how it stands now, and this is what we can And so I'm not sure. It is a difficult balance of being proactive and reactive, but I feel like when you care about a few issues that you're most passionate about, you're kind of, even though you get down, you're almost going at the same speed because you're constantly advocating for those issues. And so I personally find it helpful to stick to the issues that you really, really care about and continue to advocate for those issues. And if there is an emergency situation that isn't one of your issues, lean on your friends and people in your community that you know that it's their issues, and see how you can support those groups. And that's personally been helpful to me.
That's one of those stop me in my tracks kind of questions because it is difficult, right? I want to talk about everything, but my colleague, Councilman Corey Arthur, said something when we did Cafe Louis together a couple months ago. He said, we're legislators, not commentators. So we have to be really mindful about what we decide to talk about, because people do want you to have an opinion about everything. I may have an opinion about everything. I don't have to put that out there, right? Because I'm like, that's some crap. But I'm not going to put that out there because there's some sensitive people's feelings will get hurt if I said that. So I don't. But I also can't let it eat away at me. So there are some things I have to say something about. So this week I had to say something about Ellie Cruz's father not being able to go to her funeral or her memorial service in Uvalde. And there are a lot of folks who didn't like it. They're like, oh my gosh, he was selling drugs while at school. You totally you've totally missed the point and have decided to go down this path that is not, you're saying, let him out forever. It's, can he get out to memorialize his daughter who was murdered in this horrific shooting? But I only responded because it's not new for me to talk about prison issues. It's not new for me to talk about incarceration. That was part of what I talked about anyway. It just flowed naturally with that. The same this week when I talked about the Juneteenth banners downtown. I'm like, we're breaking chains over the city of Louisville in red, white, and blue, and we're calling downtown Juneteenth. Oh my gosh, what is happening right now? But it makes sense for me to comment on that because I'm always talking about racial justice. I'm going to talk about it, and it's going to make people uncomfortable because there are a whole lot of people who aren't talking about it. And yet, my daughter and I go back home to the Parkland neighborhood in West Louisville, and we're like, oh, we can't get any fresh fruits and vegetables here. We can't get access to a doctor here. And yet, people get mad if I talk about racial justice. But it makes sense for me to talk about that because it's part of what I talk about anyway. But there are some issues where I'm like, I don't talk about that. So why would I make a comment now? That would be weird. And sometimes reporters will call and they're like, do you have a comment about X, Y, Z? No, I don't. It's random that you're even asking me because you've never seen me even talk about this issue. So for me, it's just that mental, emotional Olympics that I go through to say, do I really need to speak on this issue? There's probably somebody else already speaking on it. This isn't something where I have expertise. Farrah can tell you about gun violence every day, all day. It's not necessarily an area where I have expertise, so I'm going to lean on the people who do. And for me, that's how I'm able to stay motivated. That's how I'm able to continue to resist, is because I don't burn myself out trying to do everything, respond to everything, be everything to everybody. I just try to focus on those things where I feel the most comfortable. And if you were to ask me a question, I feel like I can respond. And if I don't have the answer, I can send you to some resources. I can send you to some people who may have the answers to the question that you're asking.
Hi, I have a question for Attica. So I know a lot of people my age and all my friends are very passionate and have a lot of anger over a lot of issues and things going on, but they don't really know where to go with that. So the farthest that they go is they'll post a wax square on Instagram, which is nice, but informative at the most. So my question is, what's the best way from going politically passionate to politically active?
Yeah, so I would say figure out where you want to put that energy. Like if it's something where you want to make some local change, then focus on what you can do locally. Is there a school board issue that you could be part of addressing? You and your friends going to a school board meeting or Metro Council. Like Metro Council is addressing a lot of issues right now, and they need people advocating and speaking up on how they treat people who are in houses, for example. Or if it's a state level issue where the state can do something about gun violence but chooses not to, if that's where y'all want to put your energy, start advocating with your state reps, your state senators. You're probably going to have to share information out with them about how to do it. Because I think sometimes people need, just give me a 1, 2, 3. I don't know the 800 number in Frankfurt to call. I don't know the legislative handles for people to email them or eventual council members. You're probably going to have to create some quick, here you go, 1, 2, 3 ways that you can do that. I think that's absolutely fair because I don't want to go in assuming that people know how to contact those folks. They sometimes need a little bit of hand-holding, which is okay, because it's not something that we go to school and learn. This is how you are an activist, or this is how you advocate for something. The other is, I think it would be really powerful if y'all kind of identified, like I said, those 3 issues that you're really passionate about, get behind those and see how you can make a change or a difference with those. So to the question that was asked before about how do you keep from burning out, basically, please don't try to do everything. Figure out what it is that you can do something about and activate your friends, your colleagues, the people who you're adjacent to around those issues. So that way you're not burning people out and expecting them to show up for everything all the time, everywhere, say something about everything, but instead you're saying, hey y'all, what are the three things that we really want to push on? We really want to try to move. Let's focus on those. And I think that's how you keep people engaged versus them just feeling like they're all over the place and doing nothing about anything, right? All over the place and then not seeing where you're making a difference versus focus in those 3 things and you'll see some difference being made when we can get people mobilized around, just a few issues.
I guess I'd like to both of you guys. Going off like being young and passionate, I feel like I struggle specifically with like older people feeling that my passion is needing to X, Y, Z, or I guess it's emotional. And I feel like they kind of dismiss what I say because they feel that I'm being to something. So like, I guess, how do we navigate like talking to people who I guess may not have the most open ears?
Oh, I hate that. Really, I'm not sure if I remember that question, but she just asked, as a young person, she often feels dismissed by older people as if she's too emotional, and basically what she says doesn't matter. And I think more than anything, that is their problem, and it's not your problem. I personally think that we should be compassionate and empathetic to everyone, where see their perspective and honor where they are in that moment. And a lot of issues are emotional for people. We definitely see that in all the political debates that we engage in. But I would just encourage you to continue to speak out, continue to speak your mind. You are worthy, and your voice matters. And if anyone tells you that it doesn't, that's their problem.
I mean, I don't know if I would add anything else to that. Because you have every right to be emotional. And oh my gosh, that's just a way of people trying to shut you down. It's an awful thing to say to anyone, right? That you're too emotional about this, or to make someone feel like their opinion doesn't matter. It's just so dismissive. So you can't, and please try not to internalize it. I can tell you can't, but please try not to internalize that. Because also, to your point, it's probably more about them anyway than it is about you. Because I talk to a lot of older people who say things to me like, I wish when I was your age I was doing what you were doing. I'm like, oh honey, I'm 50. So you probably were doing what I'm doing now. It don't look like it. But even when I was younger, right? Ashanti's age, having older people say that to me was really more about what they felt like they missed out on, that they didn't get a chance to do, like running for office. Right? There was an older black woman I saw at the J-Town Gaslight Festival who was in tears. When she met me, she was like, just thank you so much for being there. Because she didn't see that in her lifetime. I mean, it's been 20 years since we had a black woman in Frankfurt. So she's like, it's been 20 years. I didn't think I'd ever see it again. So, you gotta keep using your voice, using your power, be emotional. I mean, geez, once you lose your emotion, we're in trouble, right? We are in absolute trouble. So hold on to it, keep it.
I
Yes.
Okay, so this is a three-part question.
Okay.
So you said earlier that you didn't feel like there was a lot of energy around voter registration. So I'd like to revisit that for just a moment. And first of all, I'd like to know your idea about why that is. And secondly, is that the county clerk's responsibility? And what is being done about that? And then my third question is, if they're doing a better job in California about getting candidate information out there, who's responsible for that? Who's doing that? And then my last is just a comment. When you talk about voter registration and there not being energy around it, that seems like such a contradiction to what Mayor Moore is doing, what Val Dennis is doing, what Stacey Abrams is doing. And if we're so active in Kentucky, why are we not doing that? And the last is also just a comment. Why are we making it so difficult? Why isn't there a venue to get into neighborhoods and to places where people, neighborhoods, churches, shopping centers, grocery stores, and the schools are sort of off limits, but there are other places where people are, where people go. So,
I think that's definitely a question for you.
so one, two,
Yes.
and three.
Third number one, yes, come back. You're absolutely correct, it is a contradiction. We see, at least across the South, I won't say across the country because I don't know enough to say across the country, but across the South, we are seeing robust voter registration drives. Fair fight that Stacey Abrams started in Georgia that has expanded to some other states. It was supposed to come to Kentucky, didn't really happen, but we're still hopeful it might happen. But in Kentucky, I'm not seeing that same level of voter registration. It's so robust in places like Georgia. It's so robust in places like Florida. I even went away to college I'm not even talking to you. Went away to college to Tennessee, and it was more voter registration happening there. We were doing it here. I just feel like in the past, I say 8, 9 years, it's dwindled. It doesn't seem to have the same kind of emphasis that it had a decade ago when I came back home, or 15 years ago when I came back home. And I don't know if it's because people have seen it as something that's not even worth doing because people don't come out and vote, and we always have historically low numbers for the primary elections and the midterms, or that people don't have the capacity anymore. I know that grant funding shifted, so I used to work at Jobs with Justice. We were almost 100% grant funded, and foundations started to shift. They were funding voter registration, voter education, and then shifted that funding to do other things. So the money wasn't there for the groups, the organizations that would do that work. So I think what we need is whatever your political party is, get involved as a precinct captain, right? And start there as a precinct captain doing voter registration in your precinct, because it is going to take that smaller body of work rather than we're going to go do voter registration across the whole Metro Louisville. No, let's start in the precincts, and then let's build out, see how the precincts are doing, and look at our numbers, year after year, on whether or not we're increasing voter registration. But I don't see anyone doing that in Kentucky or in Louisville, and so I don't know what we're going to do about that. But we'll keep working. We're trying to get Fair Fight to come to Kentucky because we need something like that, I think. Other question was about
The source of the publication about the candidates who are running for office. Who's doing that in California?
Yes, so-
There's certainly nothing like that here,
There's
except
not.
for that judges or.
The judges for judicial watch.
which you only get if you're on your mailing list.
NPR does, the local NPR region had pretty good stuff this year, but not for everything.
WFPL?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
If it feels good.
Yeah.
They had interviews with a lot of the candidates, like asked them the same 5 questions.
That's true. So it's actually local government. So of course there's state allocation, and then local government is able to print and mail those voter guides to every registered voter. It's extremely expensive. Taxpayers have to be willing to pay for that. So
It's something that we're gonna have to talk about. This was a budget year, so it'll be 2024 before the state is looking at the budget again. That means we have 2 years, y'all, to have these conversations, with your state rep, your state senator, to say, we need funding for a robust voter guide in our municipalities across Kentucky.
I think we need to have that conversation. So
Hey, this is for Attica, and it might be deeply personal, so I invite you for a chance to go away from it if you want. Am I correct that you experienced an arrest with the riots, or not riots, the protests and things?
Yes, my daughter and I were arrested together.
All right, cool. So so the question is, how does that feel? What's in your head, and your body, your spirit that experience is happening? Because I've never experienced it, and I'm halfway being an old white guy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I had hoped, my brother and my father were both incarcerated, both spent time in prison, and I had hoped that I and my children would have avoided that we would have broken that cycle. And I tried my best. She was 18. So it was no fault of my own, so I don't feel like a failure as a mama. But I wish that it had never happened, because it would have been pretty powerful to say that we broke that cycle. It's been 2 years, and this is one of the few times where I'm not already, in tears about it, because it was terrifying. As a mother, it was the only time I truly felt like I couldn't protect my child. And I didn't know what to say to her to keep her safe. And there wasn't really anything to say, right, except do everything that they say do. And then to find out, after we spent, 12 hours in jail, that we were being accused of burning down the library, I was like, now I'm really done. I'm the biggest nerd you're gonna find, love books. My son helped to start the book club when he was in elementary school at the downtown library. That's the library that's in the district I represent as a state rep. Oh my gosh, you accused me of burning down the library. But then the library union, before we even were released, put out a statement and said, we know Representative Scott, she did not try to burn down anybody's library. Y'all stop it with that accusation. And so that's what broke me more than anything, was to come out at 8 in the morning and see that statement and be like, thank you for saying that without even talking to me. But it was also disappointing that even some of my colleagues who are Democrats believed it until the charges were dropped. And so distanced themselves from me. And I was almost a pariah. And I was like, wow, we've been serving together for, at that time, 4 years. And you also know me from Metro Council, never been arrested before, but yet you believe this because it was the police's narrative versus the fact that your colleague is telling you I didn't do what they claim me of doing or accuse me of doing. So that was really painful. It was really hurtful, because I actually expected better. And that was probably part of my naivety, which I don't have a whole lot of naivety, but I think in that moment I was really naive because I was also very vulnerable. It was the most vulnerable time of my life. Like, splashed everywhere, state rep arrested. And I'm like, oh my gosh, all these people are gonna believe all the worst things possible that aren't true. And how do I fight that? Because I don't own a media outlet to then go and tell my story and print something else. So it was really hard. Ashanti, I know, had a difficult time. She was at U of L, and whoo, you talk about Gen Z. She went off on Twitter on everybody at U of L. She's like, I'm one of your students. At the time, she was a Macomb scholar, and she's like, none of you at U of L are speaking up for one of your students who was unjustly arrested, or any of the other students who were unjustly arrested. That's not okay. Stop playing it safe. Playing it safe hurts people, right? It hurts students who are trying to do their best and fight for their community. So it was painful.
Feel like you've been able to, or either of you, kind of harvest into a spot of feeling good, not good that it happened, right? But it sounds like, especially at the time, naturally there would be fear, or like, should I be ashamed, or what should I feel? But at this stage, is it a drive for pride and gratitude? And I think those might be the wrong words, but and you don't have to be, we can talk about something else if you'd rather.
No, I was going to ask you, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, I felt good about it at the time because I was getting arrested for something that was more than me. And there were people out there who, were in there way longer than we were. We were in there for a while, but there were people who were out there for longer than us. And I think it was a really good opportunity to challenge folks, because even after that, like the mayor of Louisville said, we shouldn't have been with the wrong crowd.
all of that the narrative was. So I was proud, and I still stand on my arrest, and I'm still grateful, and I still demand justice.
Okay, that's beautiful. Yeah, and I think it's important for people on the outside, if you're not in the streets and you're subjecting yourself to arrest, you need to listen to people. Like, actually, this is about the first time that I considered some of the pressure that Attica was facing from other people, because when she got arrested, I thought, ugh, this is bullshit, you know? And I assumed that's what everyone else thought too. Like, of course, she didn't start a fire in the library. And I was also seeing so many people unjustly arrested. It was just indiscriminate. People are getting arrested. They're not doing anything. And so I think I thought other people saw that as well. And so I think it's important for all of us to have some of these conversations and kind of flip the narrative that, okay, everything the police say isn't true. Maybe what the mayor is saying isn't true. What are we seeing with our own eyes? What are people that we respect saying? What is Attica saying about her own experience? And talk about that and stand behind them. Like, that is very frustrating to hear people just not standing behind you when, yeah, it's frustrating.
It's like this desperate need to believe the worst. So there was even a letter that the women of the Democratic Caucus were working on in support of me that they ended up not being able to agree on putting out there publicly because they weren't sure whether or not I did what I was accused of. I mean, to this day, I'm just like, wow, really? So if they thought that, I'm thinking everywhere I go, I'm like, oh gosh, I know half of Louisville is thinking she's the one. She was with those folks who threw that Molotov cocktail that fizzled away within seconds into the library to try to burn it down. I can only imagine how many people actually believe that, and probably to this day still believe it.
So the record's not corrected on the street?
Right. I mean, because what happens is the sensational is what's splashed on the front page, right? The sensational is what leads the news for days, and then the charges drop, just kind of like, oh, the charges were dropped. Well, the misdemeanor. And then, you know, a month later, the felony. And it's like, for some people, they still only know the arrest and the charges. They don't even know the charges were dropped. So.
Thank y'all for sharing.
I'm sorry.
Thank you for sharing.
I think to that point, it's very interesting, and a lot of the stories that I've read and stuff about when Black people are arrested, and white people are like, oh, I thought they were a good person, but this must be what happened, instead of thinking, no, that's not the person I know. And that's completely, when you're talking about your Democratic colleagues feeling that way, I think it's such a shame that that happens. And then fortunately for the two of you, you know, you had some notoriety behind you. What about all the people that don't? And then what's happening to them, and then they're still having their arrest record not being expunged or anything like that. And I think that's really hard, and I think, unfortunately, with my daughters are all bi-ethnic, and my parents have always been like, oh, if they get pulled over, they'll be fine. They know what to do. I'm like, you don't understand, that's not the issue. That's not what's going on, that's not what's happening. They'll do what they're supposed to do. That's not what's happening to the other people either, and I think that's the hard part for a lot of people to understand.
It's very hard. Pastor Tim Finley, who ran for mayor 2 years later, is still fighting his charges. Yeah. As are hundreds of other people.
See,
2 years later.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I just want to just say, listening to all of you talk and knowing how important it is to maintain that passion. Don't give it up. A couple more weeks, I'm going to be 83.
All right.
And I'm still out there campaigning and being passionate about things. This is the one thing I can share with you though. Over the years, not everybody loves you.
You have your people, which we said is important. It's important to find your people.
post about it if you're on social media.
Yes,
I said a statement, Farrah is my wife, she's a badass.
Thank you all so much for coming today. Thank you, Attica, so much for being here. It was a true honor to see your side.
Thank you so much, Farrah and Attica from Carmichael's Bookstore, and thanks to everybody who came here today. Please pick up your copy of Resistance in the Bluegrass up front. Our booksellers are very well versed on social justice titles. If you have further questions about other reading materials that you would like to check out, we are very, very, very happy to be part of this conversation with you. So thank you all for lifting up your voices and being here and sharing your experiences and taking on new ones. We appreciate it so much. And Farrah, thank you for writing this very important book.
Oh, thank you so much.
We've got plenty of time to mingle, so please enjoy the space and each other's conversation, and we look forward to having you for as long as you'd like to stay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah, you want to sign the book? She's